And we'll just wait a couple minutes and yeah, okay. It looks like we're getting some folks. Good. I was just saying to those who are just joining us that I'm going to give it a couple of minutes just to see if we have a few more participants roll in before we do our introductions and get started. So just get comfortable and we'll get going in a few. And as always, to the participants, you are welcome to raise your hand if you'd like to be called on to ask a question. You can type it in the Q&A, you can type it in the chat as we're going along. This is meant to be conversational and to give you the information that you want to hear as we talk today about transitions and moving on to college. We've been going through a transition of with a teenage driver, so not quite the same, but I'm learning to let go when I need to and try to be patient and calm in all the right situations. But it's not always easy. So I know that there can be a lot of emotions around a lot of our changes that happen in life. So, all right, well, we're a couple minutes past. We will get started and do our introductions. And then obviously as people join in to the conversation, they'll catch up and can always catch the recording of the beginning if they needed to. So first and foremost, to my panelists, thank you for being here. To our viewers, if you haven't met me before, I think I recognize most of your names here in the list, but I am Kim Stodchill, the owner and counselor at Stodchill College Consulting. And I do this Coffee with Kim program once a month on a variety of topics just to try to add some depth and dimension to this wild and crazy process. And it is the appropriate time of year, I felt like, for us to start talking about transitions and letting go and letting our children fly the nest when it's time. And so to help me with that, I have two experts who are adept at working with teens and young adults in this process. And so, Amy, I'll start with you if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then we'll turn it over to Dr. Camp.
Sure, thanks, Kim. So I'm Amy Scharf. My background is I'm a school psychologist by training. So I've worked in a number of different settings, public school systems, private school systems. I do a fair amount of testing and assessment for learning issues and work in private practice, which I've been practicing for over 10 years now. I generally work with a number of teenagers and college students. It's a wonderful population to work with, and certainly a challenging time this past year during the pandemic for all of us, and especially for teens. But I do think that in any given year, whether we had the pandemic or not, when you're in a transition year, which being a senior in high school is a transition year, you're preparing the whole year to, most of our kids are planning to leave the nest, and there's a level of stress that goes along with that. And then that first year out of school as well as a transition year, trying to establish myself in college, but also just how do I take care of myself and manage outside of my home. So I find it to be a really fascinating time. It's an exciting time, and it can be a stressful time as well. Kim, I wanted to ask you, was there anything in particular you wanted me to kind of touch on, or where would you like me to start?
Well, let's let Aarika introduce herself, and then we'll come back to you and we'll dive in. Okay, there we go. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Aarika Camp. I'm the Vice President and Dean of Students at Goucher College right outside of Baltimore. And I've been at a few schools before this, ranging from 60,000 plus students to the smallest school I'm at right now, which is about 1,500 students. So I'm excited to answer some questions depending on what type of school your student may be going to. But about my role is I kind of oversee life outside the classroom. And so the good part about hopefully answering some of your questions today now as well is that every college and university has their own set of acronyms. And a lot of people don't know what they mean. So even for student affairs, when you're like, what is student affairs? Life outside the classroom. So under me is student health, intramurals, if you're a student like sports, if they are an athlete, athletics is under me, for example, housing, the student counseling center, dining, I'm missing some stuff, the chaplain or religious offices, multicultural affairs, student activities. So really think of anything outside the classroom. And that also goes into crisis response as well. As much as we hope everything will go well every day on the college campus, it doesn't necessarily will. And so all those aspects fall under me. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or share some insights as Kim has asked me to about life outside the classroom when they come to college. So.
Excellent. Thank you both. Well, so as you can see, we've got sort of two sides of the same equation here with Amy's going to lead us off a little bit talking about some of the social emotional things that you may be experiencing in your family, you may be noticing in your teen, some things that may have you scratching your head going, what in the world is actually going on right now in my house with this child of mine? And then Aarika will lead us in a conversation again about a little bit more about that transition once they are actually on a college campus and some practical pointers about what you can expect as a parent in terms of things like communication and some other things that do change when they become college age students. So Amy, if you could start, let's dig into a little bit about, again, you've worked with so many teens over such a long period of your career. What are some things you sometimes see as we're watching them make these kinds of transitions? And what are some of the maybe emotions that are coming up for them?
So something that I see that has stood out recently to me, it just which it's consistent year over year with seniors, but also I think it's been, from what I'm seeing, exacerbated after such a stressful year is there's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement over graduating and finishing out high school. And there's a lot of messaging around how exciting it is to be going off to college and launching into this phase of your life and having accomplished finishing high school. What I hear pretty consistently, quietly and independently with teens, which we know is pretty typical, is there's a lot of anxiety and stress associated with this time as well. And that can come out and play out in different ways. Sometimes what I'll see is you'll see a senior acting more agitated at home or with their parents, and particularly they might be wanting to, they might be also, I see sometimes like some greater kind of sense of, well, I've kind of got this. I'm not going to worry so much about what mom and dad are saying because I'm preparing to leave. And, you know, I'm a lot of times it's coming right around the time they've turned 18 too. So really stretching the concept of being independent and self-sufficient, which is an important developmental step that they're developing and working on. There can be some conflict there because what I will see at times is this strong desire with the senior in high school to be independent and to demonstrate their independence and self-sufficiency, but they may not have developed all those daily living skills or habits and practices to be fully independent. And that can create some tension at home because parents are watching their teen and recognizing that they might not have all those skills in place to be a successful maybe roommate, or maybe they're not making all their appointments for themselves. And what I will hear a fair amount from seniors is, I feel like my parents are nagging me. I hear that a fair amount across the year. I think that's in part because there's been a lot of work and effort over the year to apply to colleges and make some choices. But then I think what I hear also from parents is, a lot of anxiety over, is my young teen ready for some of these transitions? And we know that they're ready in many, many ways, but for some kids, they might not have all those skills fully in place. The big thing to remember is that's okay. That's normal. Our brains aren't fully developed until we're about 25 years old. So they're still very much trying to develop and try to reduce that ease. And I think a helpful guide for parents is to try to take on a role of a consultant and maybe ask them questions like, do you have any, what do you see is going to be the biggest challenge for you heading off to school, right? And then if whatever comes up, be like, okay, how do you think you're going to handle that? Not trying to fix the problem, but serving as a consultant in that way. I think that can help ease some anxiety for an individual who's going through one of the biggest life changes that they're going to go through in life.
Absolutely. That's great advice. And I think I hear similar things from the parents' perspective and students' perspective about that butting of heads. And then also there are times when I feel like it's sort of the push-pull that students are butting heads, like I'm so ready to be out of here. And then it's very clingy time too, because that's sort of the back and forth that I've witnessed a lot of times with seniors making this transition. And I too worked on college campuses in similar roles as Aarika many years ago in my career, but saw some of that as well in those early phases of them transitioning to being away from home, that, I'm so thrilled and then I'm so homesick. So there's a lot of duality, I think, that can happen. Amy, what about, this year has been anxiety provoking in ways that I think none of us could have imagined for a lot of our teens. What are some signs or symptoms that maybe parents ought to be on the lookout for if they haven't already been identified, if there's anything that seems to sort of be coming up? Like sometimes I think we get to the end of something that's been so tense, and sometimes that's when things really rise to the surface, because we can put away the schoolwork, but now let me tell you, these emotions are all here. What are maybe some things that they should be looking for, and how to help navigate maybe these next couple of months to prepare the student for the college start?
That's a really good question, Kim, and you're absolutely right. There's been all this work to do on top of paired, almost it's overlapping and having a shutdown, and then things suddenly starting to open up with the pandemic in a lot of areas. So the big thing to be aware of is overwhelming stress, which is a stressful time for many teens, even if they're not even making that connection, is to look for symptoms of significant anxiety, depression, withdrawal, agitation is somewhat normal when they're trying to kind of establish their independence, and I don't have to fully rely on mom and dad, but I know I really need a lot of support. So looking for kind of that withdrawal, agitation. If your child doesn't seem like they're wanting to engage as much socially, emotional ability, becoming more upset at different times. I mean, some students may also vocalize that they're really anxious or they're scared. And it may come at different points. So what I see, and everybody processes things differently, it could be that we're fine, and then as the summer progresses, I'm starting to feel more anxious. We know that routine is really, really helpful, and having a routine and maintaining a routine is good for managing stressful times. When there's a natural time when the school year ends, and then there's this kind of shift, and helping your child establish some kind of routine and keeping things consistent at home, maintaining some level of consistency or constancy. Maybe it's like when we're eating dinner, or and being aware, discussing what's on the calendar. I think that is helpful. I think that's also something that's helpful for students, like as soon as they start, and Aarika, Dr. Camp can speak to this, I'm sure as well. The sooner they can establish some kind of routine at any kind of change in our life or transition period, the better the outcome. I feel like I might be missing some things. Kim, did you have any other thoughts?
Well, yeah, thoughts around any advice too on, I mean, that's great for the, I mean, so many good things, and it's leading me in a lot of different directions with my thoughts. But one of them is even this idea of, you know, as a family, how do you sort of prepare, maybe like the routine idea? What changes might happen to the routine? You know, things like curfews and you know, how are we navigating this new sort of adulthood that they're moving into?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing to remember is change, even good change, is hard. So how can we as a parent help model kind of practices and behaviors and maybe guide practices and behaviors, knowing that this is a transition time? So Kim, to your point, I think it's very important to have a conversation, ideally a collaborative conversation where you carve out some time. It doesn't have to be a long time, but you sit and talk with your child about, hey, you know, you are now finished with high school. It's this summer before college. And decide what works for you guys as a family. There's likely been already established expectations and rules around when I communicate and reach out to parents or caregivers about any changes in my plans or what I'm going to be doing when I'm coming home. You know, how do I maybe manage or ask for money? What's the expectation for a job and contribution? Chores around the house. And I think talking through that, yes, you are independent, you are moving into this next phase of life, but we have expectations and needs as a community, as a family, in our household. And ideally, we want to have a conversation where we try to engage our team to find out, what do you think is a reasonable what do you think is a reasonable expectation moving forward for the summer? Right? And before you go off to school. But what I find is when you work and ask a young person or a child, like, what do you think is reasonable? Oftentimes they can surprise us with what they think is pretty reasonable. And then also coming up with, what do we think are reasonable consequences if, you know, I asked you to come home by 12, or, you know, text or call if it's going to be later and let me know when it's going to be. And I didn't hear from you, and I was up nervous all night, and I didn't, you know, I was up until you got home. And what's that going to look like? You know, what do you think is a reasonable way as a parent to respond? And kind of go from there. I think that's a good launching point, because your son or daughter is also going to be coming home after having all this independence in college. And that can be really challenging as well, whether that's on breaks or back for next summer. And I typically hear that this is a good, it's a stress for most teens. It's not something that many teens are going to bring up unless parents bring it up. And if they feel like they have a stake and a lot of say, I think you can get a lot farther than if you say, like, and it come out in a dictating manner, like, well, you're still under my roof, and if you don't follow these rules, I'm not going to pay for school, or whatever that's going to look like. That tends to kind of create more maybe challenge, I suppose.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think those conversations around expectations should extend to things like when they are gone to school, like, what is the communication pattern at that point? You know, have a conversation around what's reasonable. You know, I'd like to hear from you once a week. You know, as a child, can you make that happen? Or do you think, what do you think is reasonable in terms of that? We know in this day and age, they are so much more connected than, you know, than when I used to have to stand in the hall and wait for the payphone, but you know, that was 100 years ago. But I think that it, you know, it's still, I knew what my parents expected of me in terms of when I was to check in and things like that, even though I was away from home. And I think having a conversation around that, what happens on a weekend and they show up with a trunk full of laundry, is that okay? You know, things that are going to happen.
Yeah, like kind of what's the expectation there? And again, parents are the for everybody like that who's dialed in. You as a parent, you're the expert on your child. You know where your child is as far as skill level, you know, where they are, where it comes to doing laundry, or, you know, checking in with you. You have some information to go on what you probably may be anticipating how they're going to manage some of this transition. But it does, yeah, I think that's a good.
Yeah. And finances, I think that too is, you know, under a clear expectation around what does that look like in terms of sources of funding from home as I'm away, and
right,
what happens when I run through it all in 1 month because I decided to go spend it very quickly on whatever, those kinds of things.
Well, and I think, oh, sorry, okay.
No, go ahead. Well, and
I think also, I think one thing that can be challenging with teens at this age is they haven't yet gone away. And oftentimes we can, as adults, because we've lived through this, we can anticipate a lot of what their challenge is going to be. But what I oftentimes see is students aren't they don't know what they don't know, and so oftentimes we need to prepare as adults and parents and caregivers that there's going to be those moments where, oops, I spent everything in my bank account. I didn't mean that. They're not developmentally, the foresight isn't fully developed at this age. So just kind of anticipating that as well. I do think kind of talking through, there is a guide, and this kind of falls somewhat into what Dr. Camp's going to be covering as well. But I do think sometimes I'll work with this individually with clients is there's college readiness. I found there's some resources out there, but I did find a resource, I believe it was from Landmark College, and it was kind of a guide, kind of an assessment. I think as a parent, it might be worthwhile on your own just to kind of take a look at that and say, like, is this something that my child kind of does do on their own? Like as far as self-advocacy, what are they handling on their own? Where might there be some maybe skill gaps? And then more importantly, instead of applying pressure to a young person who's already quite stressed right now and saying, well, you're going to have to start doing this because in a month or two, you're going to be going off to college. And I'm really concerned because you're bad about cleaning your room. And how's your roommate going to handle that? They're going to be so frustrated with you. You're not ready for college. I think just recognizing kind of where do I maybe need to scaffold and fill in, knowing that eventually it will get there, is kind of, I think, having that conversation. And if you feel like that's something you could have a conversation with your child to get started with it, I think that would be good too, helpful too.
And Amy, if you'll, after the program, if you'll send me the link, I can add it to the follow-up with the recording and things.
I will email that, yes.
That'd be great.
I think that's a good resource. Mm-hmm.
So this next question, actually, we'll start with Amy, but then I think it actually transitions well into Aarika too. But, you know, I think that one of the things we most want our students to be prepared for are some of the sticky situations that come up when they're in college. They are going to encounter, some of them already have encountered, but things like drinking and drugs, pressure for sex, sharing a room with a roommate who they may or may not have much in common with. So Amy, I'm going to start with you with what was some advice you might give about how to help prepare. And I think some of it's already sort of been touched upon. I think we just elaborate on some of that, and then we'll turn it over to Aarika to say, you know, then what are you seeing on that end, and how does it help or hurt the transition when they get to college?
Right. So these are, hopefully there has been some conversation at home around sex, around drugs, drinking, substance use, boundaries and what we're comfortable with already. If not, it is a good time to kind of check in and float that. I think parents need to figure out what they're most comfortable with, but ideally, again, we want to if we want to be able to our children to feel that we are a safe place to go to, and that they also are armed with resources and and communication tools that they need in those situations. So I think the important thing is checking in, and just sometimes even if your teen says, oh my gosh, like we don't need to talk about that's ridiculous. Just even bringing up that topic, letting him know that that's on your mind, you're aware that these are going to be some challenges likely or experiences they're going to encounter when they're in college. That does help kind of open the door a little bit. And I think also asking like, so what, hopefully you won't have any challenging experiences, but if you do, what would you do? You know, what would you do? Who would you go to? Would you feel comfortable calling me? Do you have friends that you can like call if you're in a bind? Do you know, like, is that something in college like will go that you're going to have the idea of like what resources you have on campus? I think starting those conversations is important. I will say, and I think Dr. Camp can speak to this, more and more with the students I work with and moving into college, it does seem that their colleges are doing a good job with orientation, more and more covering these challenges and consistently. And I'm curious, both Kim and Aarika, what you see. I think consistently colleges are aware of the increased need for mental health support for students and communicate that more and more. I think more than anything right now, it's top of mind for a lot of colleges, which I think is important.
I agree, but Aarika, why don't you chime in on that topic?
It's interesting, and I love being on with people who work in K through 12 because the first thing you'll notice come August of the fall is I don't use the word kids. They're not kids to me.
Right.
So, or children. At that point, yes, they're still your kids and your children, but to me, they're an adult. And so I remember my mentor told me a couple of years ago the difference between a high school senior and a college freshman is 3 months and how the college refers to them.
Right.
And so I think the first thing in talking about that transition that you asked about, Kim, is to one, reassure the support systems on and the parents and families that are on. You've taught them what you've supposed to this far. And now you're going to see some of those lessons play out. Did they really hear what you said? And now they may have to put it to work, and now they have to test what you taught them. And some of them may fail at doing that, and some of them may hit it right out the park. But the other thing is they're figuring out how to be their own person. And so some things that you may have taught them and done with them every day will go out the window once you leave campus. They may never make their bed again until they get back home, which we hope that they would, but they may not. They'll wash their sheets, but they may not make their bed, and that's okay. And so really about that transition and what's on their mind is understanding what resources we have. And Amy said so many things that were a part of what I'm going to talk about, but kind of in a different little spin as well, is that we're collaborators with you. And so what you're starting to have them do over the summer will blend into what we do on campus. And so kind of like what Amy was saying is, what things have you already started teaching them? What practices and policies do you already have in place, especially talking about the communication piece? Kim and Amy were spot on. How often do you want to hear from them? And then if you don't hear from them, should you be alerted, or should you just say, they're probably forgot and let me try to call them? I think those are things that you understand about your student that I don't understand yet when they get to me. Which goes kind of into what Kim was talking about and Amy in terms of communication. What are your expectations? So the college is not going to call you every time, no matter what school they are at. They're not going to call you every time that they're not in their room by 10 o'clock. They're not going to call you every time they get in a disagreement with someone. So colleges and universities will talk to you about signing off on FERPA, which is the, I'll call it the law where it says that I just can't call you about your 18-year-olds every time something happens. If they're under 18, that's different. But if they're 18 and older, that communication flow, we need to sign off, and the student needs to sign off with you of what we're informing you of. Now, there are times when we're going to go around that if there's an emergency and call their emergency contact. But what is the communication you're expecting from the college? How do you expect to communicate to whatever institution they're going at as well? And who are you going to call? But also, what are your expectations from the student to you? And I grew up doing it. Students do it all the time where a support system, a parent may call and ask a question. I don't know. How's class? Fine. How's your roommate? Good. Did you go to class? Sure. And so what are those new expectations? Understanding they're going to have some friends that you didn't think that would become their friends. And so the other part that Amy kind of talked on too was orientation. Most colleges and universities are now having tracks for parents or support systems as well. I would encourage if your institution has any parent orientation, any parent group through the counseling center, any parent, anything, that you participate in it. It helps you to connect with other parents. It helps you to connect into who are the resources at the college. Even if you're not physically on the campus, you may have another obligation during orientation. A lot of these things for institutions may be online this fall, or things throughout the semester may be online that I would encourage you to participate in, because it's a transition for you too. And so understanding what that transition for both of you may be like, and both may be great, both may have some bumps, but it's a transition for both the support system and the student. So
that's a really great point. Aarika, what about, say I've established a good link and communication plan with my child, and I am then starting to get concerned. I'm feeling like there's anxiety coming into play, or depression, or something else that I'm worried about. What's my recourse as a parent then with regard to student affairs? How do I handle that? Knowing it may be slightly different from college to college, but in general,
sure.
what do we do?
Well, I would say even before your student transitions to college, if they're already seeing a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a therapist, seeing what's already available on that campus. All campuses will have a student counseling center. They may mostly have therapists or psychologists. They may not have a psychiatrist. Or someone that prescribes or manages medicine. So check your counseling center to see if they have all the resources you need. Start having documentation go there now. So once your student is at the school, it'll be a seamless transition into them scheduling appointments and managing everything they may need. If there is another type of physician that you may need that's not at the school, start now trying to locate someone in that community area to do that. And that may be even just the pharmacist. If you're at a smaller school, where I went to the mega state school that had a pharmacy on campus. I'm at a small liberal arts right now, and we don't have a true pharmacy on campus, but we have one right across the street. So start locating those resources. I think the other part, if you're starting to see things flare up at once your student gets here, and if they're not being treated by somebody, or maybe they haven't gone to a counseling center before, is to reach out to the dean of students, reach out to, if they're living on campus, reach out to the housing staff, and start sharing with them some signs of things that you're seeing. So let's say, for instance, your student is normally very extroverted and love joining clubs and orgs, and right after orientation joined everything. And now we're in October, and you notice every time you talk to them, they're in their room. They're always in their room by themselves. Asking them the question of, what happened to your friends? Or are you in clubs or seeing what they're saying? And then letting us know. Don't wait till it got to a point when now it's an issue, but you're starting to see these trends along the way. I always say we're collaborators with parents, and now we're collaborating together to teach some of these life lessons and conflict mediation and resolution, resiliency skills. We're now teaching these things together. I think in the expectation of that, understanding that the college or institution won't just fix it. We'll try to coach your student through it. And I think that could be the number one frustration for some parents is, when your student was at home, you could just fix it. Now we're in a college setting, we're not just going to fix it, we're going to try to coach them through it. There's another student involved who also has parents and also has support systems. So you may say, oh, well, that doesn't seem fair. You're not doing this for my student, but there could be multiple students involved as well. And so knowing that we'll work through it, teach them how to navigate through that issue, but you're always welcome to call your dean of students, your housing staff. If your student says that they're more connected to their athletic coach or their academic advisor, don't hesitate to call anyone at an institution. And I'm talking about all my colleagues across the country, is that we're happy to help you before a situation becomes a situation if we can be proactive in it.
And I think that's really important, because I do think it's sort of become legend or myth in some cases that, the parents are going to be completely excluded, and that, you can't pick up the phone and call and talk. Maybe you can't call the professor about a grade, but there are still plenty of other adults. And I love the way you're describing this as it's collaboration. It's working together in the best interest of the student. And I really hope that the parents pick up on this. Like, I think that's become a myth that, my kid goes off to college and they say, I don't get this information, and the FERPA prevents me from being, even getting their grades. And there are ways to make that work. And I think that's really an important note. Can you talk us real quickly, practical steps? How do you go through that FERPA authorization so that there can be the exchange of information?
Absolutely. Every school is different, but I would say the majority of schools is either through their registrar, through admissions, or financial aid. It's typically through one of those three offices where you can call and ask. And most of them, I have them on their webpage. I can't think of any school right now, if you went on their webpage and just typed in FERPA on their page, that it won't come up. And it really will, they will walk you through of, if your student signs off and if you sign off, this is the information we can give you. Okay. That doesn't mean that now you get information on who visited their room last night or who they're hanging out with. This gives you access to their financial records to the school, their grades. This lets us communicate with you if there is an issue around safety or concern. So this doesn't give you free access to their everyday download of life. They still have privacy, but the FERPA sign-off allows you to more of their records and for us to communicate with you around their safety and concerns. So I would say too, as much as I'm saying, communicate with us, talk to us, some things you have to let your student figure out. So a prime example that I always use, and I remember talking to the parent and they were like, you're right, Aarika, is that a pair of their jeans went missing out of the dryer. So in some res halls, you're gonna have community laundry. And yes, it will happen. Your students will leave their laundry in the dryer thinking that they're at home. They'll leave it in there for 4 days. Another student will come and take it out, typically not to steal it, but just will sit it on top of something. And the parent calls, somebody stole my student's jeans. Did your student leave the jeans in there? Did they left it in there for 3 days. What did you think was going to happen? So that's not saying that you can't call us, but for those level issues, I think it gives you a life lesson conversation of, you can't just leave stuff everywhere like you would at home and think it's gonna be okay. And have you gone to public safety? Have you filed a report? And so it's coaching them through those things. So when they're done with college, they know how to navigate them as well. And then the things that, and I'm sure all of you have great judgment, the things that you're more concerned about your student safety, absolutely call us. But there's going to be some issues come up where your student may take a knock on the knee and say, well, I guess you lost the jeans and this is how you're going to be more responsible. But the college will help them as well. But sometimes it'll be that call, that frantic call, please save the day. And it's like, well, what are you doing to learn how to save your own day? And that's okay to have that conversation too.
That's really important. I mean, and I think we spend on, from what I do now, so much time thinking about, just getting into college, and we focus so much on, that part of the process and, what you're going to learn while you're there, which we typically focus on majors and career choices and outcomes. But there's so much that is happening outside of the classroom that's so important in their development and their maturity. And There can be some tough lessons at times along the way. That's sure. That's absolutely true. Um, Erica, what about just trends in general that you have seen over the past few years? Anything positive, anything alarming? Like what's going on with teenagers once we do send them to you and they become adults and your students, not our kids? What's happening out there?
Well, a lot of it is exploration. And I think that's the hardest transition for the support systems or parents is that some things that you thought your student may believed in, now they're questioning. Some things that you thought your student knew about themselves, now they're questioning because they may be around people that they never knew about a different way of living or how to do something differently. More and more college students are not uniformed around uniform religion anymore. We're finding more and more college students are maybe more spiritual or into different practices than maybe the uniform religion they may have grown up with, especially if they're trying a new practice on campus. So you'll see a lot of students try that. You'll see a lot of students challenge their sexual orientation or gender identity. And I would say talking to your students about what's important to them while they're going to college. And so for some students, it's important that we introduce ourselves with pronouns at the college. For some students, it may not be that important. And so having your student explore some of those things, they may change their fashion sense. I love seeing students go back home for the winter break or going back home for the summer break, like Amy said, and the parents just look at them and go, you left with brown hair. Now you have orange hair. Like what has happened? And so, and I think having them celebrate that identity that they're trying to find, as long as they're doing this safely, and not hurting anyone else, they're starting to ask themselves these questions. Or we find students who will double down on the identities they came into college with. And so as they may be struggling with different issues at college, they may go deeper into their religion and find solace in that. They may get here and realize just how homesick they are. A lot of students may have told you right away, I want to get as far away from home as I humanly possibly can. If I can move to another continent, I would. And now they're an hour and a half away and call you every 15 minutes. And some students are like, they're gone and you're like, hey, don't forget me. And so a lot of students will go to college and start figuring those trends out. A lot of students will also now get into technology more as we all know already, to meet other friends and to find partners or spouses to date. And so again, as they're figuring those things out, teaching them how to be safe, that's the main concern for a lot of colleges now is with technology, somebody may meet somebody online and go out with them that night, and we don't know where they're going and who they're with. And so that's a trend that still plagues me every day. And so teaching students how to be safe, most college campuses will also have apps for that. So also go into your students' campus safety page. So for instance, at Goucher College, we have an app called Campus Shield, where they put it on their phone, where if they hit that button on their phone at some point, it'll alert 10 people in their phone that they put in, contact my mom, my roommate, my dad, my cousin, my whoever, and it'll send a text message to them about where they are, who they're with, and what time they're supposed to be coming back. So it's not the same as with a parent of when will you come back, who you're with, whatever. We don't ask those questions as they're going, but they can put certain mechanisms in for that. And the last part I would say, Kim, that are trends we're starting to see even more so is what the expectations are while they're in college. And so now to try everything humanly possible. So if your student is saying, I want to travel, study, or study abroad, or I want this internship, externship. So we're seeing even more and more the colleges are putting in these external experiences where they can get to learn more about themselves in other environments, where it makes them more ready for the career field. It makes them more ready after college to live independently on their own. And so those are also trends you're starting to see of colleges putting in these experiential learning opportunities. And to support that, it may not be the major that they picked, that they're going to try to explore something else in. And please support them figuring that out.
That's great advice. We're right at a good point to take audience questions. I want to go back real quickly though and talk about homesickness for just a second. That seemed to resonate with Amy as well, nodding her head. And, you know, I'll share personally, again, 100 years ago when I was in college, but one of the greatest things I'll always remember my mom saying to me, I wanted to come home one weekend. And she knew I was having a hard time. I was trying to avoid, you know, putting myself out there and things like that. And she told me no. And I lived in driving distance, and I thought, oh, golly, I mean, she just doesn't even love me anymore. But by her doing that, it forced me out of my comfort zone. And it was a turning point really for me in my freshman year of college, when I was feeling insecure and feeling like I had, you know, maybe I didn't make the right decision and those kinds of things. And so, you know, I think we hear it a lot. And, you know, even as a college counselor, especially when I was still working in schools, I would sometimes get in touch with students and they would visit when they would come back and things like that. And we would talk a lot about the homesickness factor. And I think one of the other really important pieces of advice I heard one of my colleagues say one time is, this was years ago, I was working at an all-girls school, and it was 6 through 12. So a lot of long-term relationships are developed when you go to school for that long with the same people. And one of our students said, I don't have the same kind of friends as I did here. And my colleague said, you took 6 or 7 years to make those friendships. You've been there 6 weeks. Like, you've got to have some perspective in terms of the developmental stages of friendship too. And they don't have that, a lot of them, because they've been in the same place for a long time. But anything else that you two would add about homesickness in general? And then we'll see if there are questions from the audience.
I would say the first thing is to ask them, what are they missing? Is it you they're missing? Is it the food they're missing? Or is it that they're not homesick? They're just scared of being where they currently are. And so some of those comfort things you can put in place for them as you're taking them to campus. So if there are certain food types that you know they like, make sure they know where to go to get it, or is it available on campus? Ask them, how are they going to stay connected to their friends from high school? And a lot of those friend groups will dissipate that first year in college as each person starts to make their own friends as well. How are they connecting with their roommate? And then some just are homesick. And I think scheduling a time ahead of time that they can look forward to that date versus just knowing I can go home whenever I want to. I mean, my family lived not even a few miles from where I went to undergrad. And there were times where I was like, I just don't want to go home, or I just wanted to go home and sit on my bed or on the sofa I grew up on. But scheduling that date allows for them to say, I have this to look forward to, whether that is if the institution has a winter break, Thanksgiving break, or it's when they come home for the longer break over the holidays. But I think that's important, and asking them what they miss. And if you need to mail them something, mail them something. But I agree with Kim that not coming home every weekend, because eventually that's going to be more of an inhibitor to them being in college than helping them adjust to college.
I think that I absolutely echo what Aarika said. I love the idea of looking before you leave campus, looking on the calendar and saying, well, I will see you in this weekend in October, or whatever that's going to look like. So they have that to kind of anchor them. When it comes to, I also heard Aarika mention resilience, and I talk with a lot of my clients about mindfulness practice, and one good sort of practice I think that's important when we think about comforting things is think about our 5 senses, right? Like wherever I am, I want to know, what is my sensory profile when it comes to things in all the senses that are calming or soothing for me. And that's, what is soothing for me? Maybe I have pictures of my friends or my family to look at visually. Maybe I, sensory wise, there's some maybe we can't have candles at school, but like some soaps or shampoos or things or foods, the smell of foods from home that I eat that I can tap into. A soft, blanket or pillow that I've brought from home. All of those things when we're feeling lonely, it's good to kind of maybe troubleshoot with like what is comforting for you. What feels like soothing and calming for me. That's important. One, that's just a resiliency fact, something that we want to work on. It's like, what are my tools? Because whether I'm lonely or I'm sad from or feeling hurt by something or frustrated about something, I need to know what is something that's going to help ground me. So that's one thing. And then the other aspect is the 4 pillars. So, I do think helping your child think about what are my routines, but there's 4 pillars for just general wellness. If I'm feeling down or low or lonely, like my nutrition, my sleep, my physical movement, and then my emotional support and connectedness. And for some students, like emotional support and connectedness, it's hard. Yes, true friendships are a plant of slow growth. So it takes some time. I mean, I might even be well into my college years before I feel like I have that long-term safe friendship. But if I have a list of, whether it's a group that I can attend or calling a friend, sometimes just even going somewhere and calling somebody and just letting them know, like, I just wanted to hear your voice, but now I'm going to go for a walk with my friend that I met down the hall. All of those things, let's tap into some of those things: nutrition, sleep, physical movement, and then emotional connectedness and support.
Excellent advice. Thank you. Participants, parents, do you have any questions? And like I said, you can raise your hand, type them in the Q&A or the chat. I want to be sure that we answer whatever is on your mind. You all too might benefit from knowing that there's a date on the calendar when you will see your child again. I know that I like that when we're talking about camp, even like I know when it will end and when he will be home. Maybe not. Okay, well, that's good. Well, we have certainly covered a lot of ground, I think, today. I think it's always fun to have this conversation. And, I think it's smart that we're, those of you parents who joined us, you're thinking ahead already about it. And that's really important. And you've probably been thinking about it for even longer than now, but it's really good that you are being proactive and thinking through what are some practical steps you can take to help with this transition. And know that some of the erratic behavior, the emotions are going to be very normal. And I used to also say, as the end of school year would happen, especially with my seniors, like even well before the end of the school year, there were times I would say, they're ready. And we need them to be ready. And some of that behavior, while it can be challenging, is actually a demonstration of them being ready. They're ready to make the separation and try it on their own. And, but they still need that sort of safety net there just in case. So any last minute thoughts that you all would share? If not, it's not a big deal, just checking in. And
I would say just check the resources at the college or institution your student may be going to, that everything that you think they may need is there. And if it's not there, it's okay, because most likely there's something in the community that will support whatever you're looking for as well. So I tell people from all the time, whether that's food, a pharmacy, whether that's a place to get your hair done or your nails done that you like, whatever it may be, kind of scope those things out before you get there. And then even when you get there in orientation, go visit them, see how far they are. So just when you may leave campus from dropping them off, they know, okay, if I need this, this is where I go to get it. And then some things let them find on their own throughout the course of the year if they need to find it, that they're going to have to learn how to do those things too. So, and you'll be okay. I promise you'll be okay.
Yeah, I think I absolutely exactly what Aarika said. And then I think also just trying to be mindful. This is a nerve-wracking time for parents, and it's difficult. And I think trying to check ourselves when our anxieties or worries are coming up, and just keeping in mind that reinforcing that we are confident in our young person, and reminding them that they are capable and able to do it. I think voicing our worries maybe, you know, with another adult, but not to them, is helpful, because I do think, you know, what we say to our kids becomes their internal monologue when they go out into the world. So reminding them that they are capable and they don't have to have all the answers. They just know that what their resources are, and they'll be okay.
Wonderful. That's all great advice. And I'm so grateful for the two of you for being here. It's always fun to connect various networks from my life and collaborate together like this. So I'm grateful. To the participants that are still on the call, thank you all for being here. If you have any follow-up questions, please reach out. And when I send out the recording, I'll also send out a link to the resource that Amy referenced earlier on in the conversation, and make sure that you have access to that. Be well. This will be a fun and exciting time, although it will certainly have some emotion attached to it as well. And I think that's an important point to remember too. We can experience dual emotions, the excitement and the sadness at the same time. And it took me to being an adult to really kind of grasp that. And I think the kids don't always get that, of course, you know, that they think they're supposed to be so excited. So why am I feeling sad and anxious about going away? So remind them that that's perfectly normal as well. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Katie. It was great to have you joining us again. So I will see everybody hopefully again next month. Next month, it's just me. I'm just going to answer questions about fire away, whatever we're going to talk about in terms of the college process. Amy and Aarika, good to see you, and I will be in touch. Thank you. Bye.